Hello and welcome to What the F*** Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. Welcome to day 645. Earth is on track to warm above 2 degrees Celsius, and global reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are nowhere near the scale they need to be. This according to a new report from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Under the current combined climate pledges from the 193 parties to the Paris Agreement, global temperatures are on track to rise to 2.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial averages by the end of the century, a full degree higher than the goal set out in the Climate Pact, which aimed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The UN says that while other countries are, quote, bending the curve of global greenhouse gas emissions downward, end quote, efforts remain, quote, insufficient, end quote, and that in order to keep this goal alive, quote, national governments need to strengthen their climate action plans now and implement them in the next 8 years, end quote. Meanwhile, the World Meteorological Organization warned that atmospheric carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide levels are accelerating, and that 2020 and 21 were the largest increases since record-keeping began in 1983. In a statement, the WMO said, quote, more bad news for the planet, end quote. Moving on, a South Carolina judge ordered Mark Meadows to testify before the Georgia grand jury investigating Trump and his allies' efforts to reverse the results of the 2020 presidential election in that state. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis said her inquiry is examining the, quote, multi-state coordinated efforts to influence the results of the November 2020 election in Georgia and elsewhere, end quote. Willis had to petition a judge in South Carolina to compel Meadows to comply with the subpoena because he doesn't live in Georgia. Willis noted that Meadows traveled to Georgia where an audit of the state's election was underway and participated in the telephone call that Trump made on January 2, 2021 to Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, during which he asked Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes that would enable Trump to defeat Biden in that state. South Carolina Circuit Court Judge Edward Miller ruled that Meadows must comply with the subpoena as his testimony is, quote, material and necessary to the investigation, and that the state of Georgia is assuring not to cause undue hardship to him, end quote. Meadows plans to appeal the ruling. And finally, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito said the leak of his draft opinion eliminating the constitutional right to abortion after almost 50 years made some justices targets for assassination, complaining that the leak was a grave betrayal of trust. In his majority opinion to end Roe v. Wade, Alito wrote that the 1973 ruling was egregiously wrong and that there is no constitutional right to seek an abortion for any reason. When asked about criticism that the Supreme Court has strayed too far from public sentiment and become partisan when it overturns precedent, Alito pushed back, saying, quote, to say that the court is exhibiting a lack of integrity is something quite different. That goes to character, not to a disagreement with the result or the reasoning, end quote. Alito also took issue with those who have questioned the legitimacy of the court, saying that it, quote, crosses an important line when they say that the court is acting in a way that is illegitimate. I don't think anybody in a position of authority should make that claim lightly. That's not just ordinary criticism, that's something very different, end quote. Alito's remarks came during an event at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. And in the polls, NBC News says 65% of registered Republican voters don't believe Joe Biden was elected legitimately, while 22% believe in the legitimacy of Biden's election. Overall, 60% of registered voters say they believe Biden's election was legitimate, and 33% do not. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditis.